Good evening, everyone. Before we begin the program, I'd like to invite a very special young man, Kian, up to offer a land acknowledgement.
We would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we live, study, and work on are the lands traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Shinaden peoples. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. We are all treaty people with the responsibility to honor all our relations.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Kian. Hi everyone, I'm Barb Cardo and I'm a co-chair of the Children and Youth Planning Table, and I'll let my partner in crime introduce herself in just a second. Really happy to be here with you today and just want to say Happy Expo Day. This is our second year doing this, and what an exciting event it is, and so great to see so many people doing the important work of belonging for our children and youth, and to see members of our community coming and learning about everything that's going on. As you know, we have Oluseun and Dillon talking tonight in the theater from 6:30 to 7:15. The topic of the discussion will be the importance of belonging and how to foster belonging within families. Thank you so much for being here, and please make sure, if you haven't already, that you visit the booths upstairs to learn about the programs for children and youth and families that are supporting belonging. And now I'll ask my partner in crime to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I just wish to add my voice of welcome. My name is Garanka Vukovic, and I am the other co-chair of the planning table. It's really exciting for us to be doing this work. I think that, Allison, if I may, can I say it's our second expo. So this is really exciting for us to really look at and commit ourselves to belonging. It is such an honor to be part of a community that has the courage to really unpack and consider the voices of our children and youth as we think about what belonging means. We know as adults how important it is for us to feel like we belong. We work in places and spaces that really make an effort to make us feel like belong. And so it's really important for us to also consider our children and our youth and make sure that their voices are heard in shaping spaces and places of belonging. So it's an exciting evening for us. As Barb said, we have two wonderful guests here who will really help us think about what does this work look like for us in our community and how we can work together to make all of this happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Kian because he is going to be our facilitator for the evening, and he will introduce our guests. Again, thanks for being here, and I hope we have a wonderful evening. Thank you. That will be even better. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those words from the chairs of the CYPT. So before we start off with this talk today, I would like to introduce myself. So my name is Kian Mirzai. I am a grade 11 student at Laurel Heights Secondary School in Waterloo, and I am one of the youth connectors at the Children and Youth Planning Table of the Waterloo region, where I work to elevate youth voices and work with adults to support youth well-being in the community. And today I'm here with Dillon and Oluseun, who will be talking about a little bit about belonging. So over the next 45 minutes, we'll be having a conversation on belonging and how we can work together to foster it within families and communities. So, like I said, we're here with Dillon and Oluseun, who will be sharing their experiences and their wisdom on this topic. I'm really curious about how their wisdom and experiences go together with everyone else's lived experiences and wisdom in this room, and I think it'll be a great conversation. We all have a role to foster belonging in the community, and we all have a lot of wisdom to offer. So, starting off today's talk show, Oluseun and Dillon, can you please introduce yourselves and start off our conversation by telling the audience about a time that you felt like you belonged?
Thanks, Kian. My name is Dillon Browne. I'm an associate professor at the University of Waterloo. I'm also a clinical child psychologist. Part of my work is interested in exploring how family relationships and mental health inform one another and how those constructs are embedded in a broader community system and are related to social determinants of health. I really like your question. It's a difficult question. And keeping with our talk show format, maybe I'll share a bit of a story. So you asked about a time where I felt belonging, right? And I think it's important for me to begin by acknowledging that for some reason, probably genetic lottery, as early back as I can remember, the prominent emotions that colored my experience were fear and sadness. Kind of surprising, perhaps. I mean, I was born into a family with two loving parents, upper middle class, as a cisgender, white, heterosexual Christian male. Most spaces in the West and North America have been created and curated for someone with my social locations. Nevertheless, for some reason, I felt as if I was apart from, unable to connect, and lonely and isolated. That's the earliest memories I have were of that. And so I had supportive adults in my life, and I kind of got through those early years and eventually found drugs and alcohol. And when I connected with a peer group who shared those interests and first encountered that intoxication from drugs and alcohol, I was immediately catapulted into what I describe as a sense of belonging. I felt unity, I felt connectedness, I felt like I was a part of, and I thought, this is how I want to feel forever. And that was a good solution for a while, and it worked for a while until it didn't and started having consequences. And it was later in my life, in my 20s, where those consequences started to get greater, and I was able to find other men who could share about vulnerability, talk about their internal states, and be real with their emotions, that I found that connection without having to engage in activities and practices that were ultimately self-destructive. So I think now I feel pretty good in the way of belonging. I feel belonging with the Children and Youth Planning Table. I feel belonging at the University of Waterloo. I feel belonging in KW. I feel belonging in my faith community here. And it's been a bit of a journey.
Okay. When we had conversations earlier and I realized this was how Dillon was going to start, there was a big smile on my face, and I think I gave you a fist bump, because that was how I thought to start, was to say, when in my life didn't I feel like I belonged, and what changed? was that teenager or youth, let's use youth for the sake of this conversation, who never felt they belonged. And my reasons were many. I was a pastor's kid. My dressing today is intentional. As a PK, as we were called, we were not allowed to wear pants, we only wore dresses and skirts. And as I became a teenager, I became the odd one out amongst my friends. Because fashion evolved, people went into jeans and shorter dresses and makeup and longer hair, nails, and my parents wouldn't allow me to do any of those things. So very quickly, I became the one that didn't belong to anything. And that went on through high school. So every time I've spoken to youths, I've always tried to highlight how important it is that they know that I don't belong. Well, today, my name is Oluseun, and I have a title of Adventure for Change, Executive Director. But the journey that transitioned me from feeling like I did not belong, nobody wanted me in their cliques, and that went on through till middle of university, because again, I didn't even belong in university, and I had names that had been given to me, and I was supposed to be the person that would be a nobody, was what my friends told me. And I remember someone actually walking up to my mom and saying to her, the way your daughter is going, she would not have a man to marry. When I was in Africa, marriage was important as a conversation. So it wasn't just the youth that felt this youth had a problem. The parents believed this particular youth had a problem. So I was never accepted, never felt like I belonged, and continued to live my life that way. But what changed was the power of mentors in my life that began to invest in me, because this was something that every other person didn't say. And I remember in 2004, somebody said to me, you were born in the wrong generation. And that person said that to me because she said, you don't move with your mates, you always move with older people. And the reason was the only place that I felt like I belonged was with older people. They saw what my mates could not see. They believed in me way more than my mates believed in me. They pushed me and saw things I didn't see myself. They spoke into my future and told me I would be great and a star. And I was wondering, but my friends don't see that. So somehow I got pulled to that demographic of older people, parents and aunts, were the people I spent my time with. And those were the spaces where I felt like I belonged. The irony is that that's not what I put down to share. What I was going to share, I will still share because it ties in. Which is that the latest time I felt the highest level of belonging was March this year. Of late, I'm talking about of late, the remaining. And why? Because I had gone back home to visit my dad, who was in a coma, who eventually passed while I was on my way to check him in. And I noticed the difference between my 6 years of being in Canada and going home. Because getting home, I felt like this is my space. I didn't have to repeat words twice. Nobody was saying, can you say that again? My voice was important. I'm the first kid of 5 whose father just passed. So there were several meetings and they were calling on me to make decisions. Everybody was celebrating my decisions, my words, my comments. And there was just this feeling of, what am I doing outside of here again? This is where I belong. I could dress without thinking about the weather and what people would think. I ate what everybody ate. When it was time to dance, because in my culture, if you had children and 12 grandchildren, there would be a party. So I danced without looking, without checking my back. So this year, And that's when I wrote, the point or the time that I felt like I belonged the most was where I was with people that looked like me, talked like me, had hair like me, dressed like me, danced like me, sang like me, celebrated like me.
Thank you, Dillon and Oluseun, for talking about the time that you felt like you really belonged, and also times that you felt like you didn't belong. I think it's very interesting to hear about your own lived experiences and how both of you, when you heard the question, you thought about the opposite. You thought about a time that you didn't belong first. I know in my own life, there have been a lot of times where I felt on the top of the world, like I belong really, really well. But then on the flip side, there have also been times that I felt like I do not belong at all. And looking back, I think that I focus more on those times that I don't belong, more than the times that I do belong. And I think that maybe I'm just a negative person, but maybe that sense of not belonging is a very negative feeling and something that we have to work together as a community to break down. So, as a next question, why do you think belonging is important?
Okay. It's very important because that thing I described first, that feeling I had, is a feeling that makes you feel well. There's a well-being that comes with feeling like you belong. Because you're not thinking about living, you're just living. There's a word being and be that always comes to my mind when I think of belonging. People just want to be. But there are spaces that don't allow youth, especially because we're talking youth and children today, to just be. And it starts from the family. And then it goes on to school, and then community, and then places of worship, and the list is endless. And when youth and children do not feel like they belong, potentially they are not well. Because they are trying to be something that they are not, or trying to fit into molds that are not them. So that's one reason for me why it's very important to belong is people need to be well. People need to feel celebrated and accepted and comfortable. In the space that I work, because I promise to use a lot of community to share this, one thing I have seen is the times when you see the moms and the children and the youths in our community at their best will be events like our cultural evenings. So there are these parties that we call cultural evenings, where moms and their children just come together and celebrate. Sometimes it's all female, so that the Muslims in the building can take off their hijabs and just chill and just celebrate. And you see them at those times dance and sing and eat and bring food that they cooked. No boundaries. They're at their best. They feel whole. I like that word. And that's where integrity comes from. They feel like one person. And there's no judgment in those spaces. And there is no competition in those spaces. Everybody brings the best of themselves to spaces where they feel like they belong. On the opposite side, people hold back and are afraid and are confused. And we know that some of the things I just mentioned are contributors to mental health illnesses and so on and so forth. So for a person to be fully well physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially, belonging is very important.
I agree with everything you just said. And I'll try to say something different so it's not redundant. It won't be as eloquent as what you just said, which was brilliant. And this is something that we've been thinking about as a group with the Youth Impact Survey as well. And I think, Oluseun, what you described there to me sounded like the importance of belonging as one of the determinants of mental health and well-being. And I fully agree with that. I think also there can be the alternative direction where mental health and well-being people who do have mental disorders or psychological difficulties for whatever reason might feel less belonging subsequently. So this is the idea that belonging and well-being are recursively connected in both directions. And maybe in addition to what Oluseun said, I'll just offer perhaps a more dry scientific explanation as to why belonging is important. And I think it has to do partially with our species, with our neurobiology. The idea, if you think about the evolution of humankind, we've been fundamentally social organisms forever. And if you look into recent history, the term loneliness wasn't really used until the Industrial Revolution, at least in the English language, in the English lexicon. And so there was something that happened in history that reorganized our group dynamic, this collective, into greater fragmentation. And while I worry a bit of casting digital media as demonic and inherently bad, it's an important tool, and at the same time we need to be mindful of how digital connection can sometimes be a hindrance to, say, what Oluseun was describing of all those women connecting in person together and sharing those bonds, getting the affiliative hormones like oxytocin flowing, and really feeling the good stuff that comes from social connection. Today is just a remarkable example of that. I don't know how many coffees I have, but I think I'm also running on belonging as well as caffeine. So I think, yeah, both of those explanations, I believe, are complementary and helpful as we're thinking about why belonging is important.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear from you guys about why you think belonging is important, and ultimately it is very important. Like you were talking about earlier about how human nature, we innately want to feel like we belong, we want to feel like we're a part of something. I see that in high school every single day with people just wanting to fit in, being together with other people, keeping in contact. That is what belonging means to me, and what people strive for belonging, and what we should strive for as a community. So now I have a little bit of a question for all of you guys here. This one isn't a very hard question to ask or to answer. It's a yes or no. So raise your hand if you've heard of the Youth Impact Survey before. Wow, that's almost everyone here, which is really good because we really tried to push it out here at the CYPT. A lot of advertisements, a lot of media appearances. So for those who don't know or forgot, the Youth Impact Survey is a survey that we here at the Children and Youth Planning Table of the Waterloo region hold every few years. And it is a way for us to record different data about youth well-being and about youth living in the Waterloo region. So through the Youth Impact Survey in 2021, one of the youth that responded to the survey described belonging as, belonging means you don't have to hide who you are in order to fit in. So my question for you, Dillon and Oluseun, is why do you think it's important that youth don't hide who they are and they feel like they belong without hiding those aspects of themselves?
Okay. I'll start with an experience I had last year, May. We had an open house, and some teachers came in from the high school closest to the Adventure for Change Hub, and they were around the table having a conversation. So I had gone to introduce myself to connect, and two of the teachers said, "We have been watching your youths engage and relate in this space, and they're different from the youths that we engage and relate with at school." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Here they're so confident, relaxed, they're having fun, they're giving high fives, there's smiles on their faces. At school, these boys don't talk to anybody." And I said, "Thank you." What those teachers said to me clearly was this: at the hub, the boys felt they belonged. It was their space, because that's how we treat them. So in their space, the teachers were the guests. They were in charge. They determined what they wore, what people drank, how people drank it, what they ate. They were the servers and the greeters. And so they felt like, welcome to our, actually that's what a teacher said, they were like, welcome to our space. Because that's where they come after school to do their homework and play games and watch matches when the leagues are playing. But at school, it's a place they must go to because they don't have a choice. But when they get there, they don't feel like they belong. And so what that youth is saying is, at school they are not their true self, because that space prevents them from being that. So they hold back. They feel less than. And in some cases, they don't even want to go, which is the other side of that we have seen at Adventure for Change, is that a few of our boys are in the basements of their families' houses, because at grade 10, they were just like, I am not going back there. It's terrible. They put me down, they don't believe in me, I am not welcomed. And the partnership that we had with another school, a middle school this time around, caused me to go speak to those kids at the beginning of this new year. And when I got there, I asked them, the irony was that topic was about belonging. So I asked the youth, I said, what qualifies a person to be a student at this school? Now, I had my list on my PowerPoint, but I didn't show them. And they passed through elementary school, check. They are XYZ age, check. They are, check. Everything on my slide they said, and I said, well, how come when somebody that checks all those criteria comes into our school, we then suddenly say, you don't belong. You can't be in our clique. We don't like you. You're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too slim, you're too dark, you're too light. And to make it worse, which is why I was invited, some names begin to come out like the N-word and monkey and so on and so forth. So I asked these 500 plus children, why? And nobody could answer me. So tomorrow, that kid will not want to go to school because a school that they qualify to be in and they check the boxes of why they should be there, regularly tells them, you don't belong. And so they will either not want to go, or when they go, they will not be their true self.
Dillon, what happens when young people have to hide who they are in order to fit in?
I want to just touch on one of the terms Oluseun just used, which was true self. And if we think about identity for a moment, what is identity? It's usually comprised of a few core constructs or ideas or even labels, if you will, that are core to our sense of self. And when people feel like they have to hide aspects of their true self, there can be fragmentation, that there are parts of oneself that are okay, that are permissible, that are approved by society, by a social group, by a school, and there are other elements that must be hidden and are therefore not good. And so this schism or internal breaking starts to happen, where the idea of having a global positive sense of self becomes impossible. And so when people are not accepted in all of their identity spaces, then the net result can be lower levels of self-compassion and even in extreme cases, self-hatred. And that is extremely, extremely dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for talking about those aspects of when youth have to hide who they are in order to fit in. This is one thing that I find to be very fascinating, because looking back on me, even when I was in elementary school, I am an immigrant to Canada. I moved here when I was 9 years old, and when I moved here, I'm half Filipino, half Persian, and if you know Filipino food, some of our food is really, really yummy, but it's also really smelly. And I think this is like a classic story that a lot of immigrants have. So when I would go to elementary school, I'd bring my smelly but delicious food with me. And my classmates would look at me. They would say, "What is that? Why is it so smelly?" And I didn't feel like I belonged. Even though I liked the food, even though it was really tasty, I didn't feel like I belonged because my food didn't look like my classmates' food. So in that aspect, I had to hide a part of myself in order to fit in with others. And looking back on it, I wish there were other people around me who stood up to that expectation of having to fit in with others. And I wish that I stayed true to who I was and not felt the need to hide who I was. So yeah, I think we had an awesome conversation today. My very last question for the two of you is we started our chat tonight with a comment that everyone has a role to foster in belonging. Specifically when it comes to families, how do we do it?
Very polite up here. It's a good question, Kian, and I would like to think for a moment about the question. So how can families cultivate a sense of belonging? And I wonder if somewhat implied in that question is that it's something that is relatively easy to do, or something that is amenable to change, when what we're seeing in the research we're doing with the Youth Impact Survey is that belonging is something that's multiply determined across multiple parts of society, school, neighborhood, family, and also individual well-being, and interacted in this kind of complex network. So I wouldn't want to ever suggest to families that if their child feels like they don't belong, that there's something that they're doing wrong. That may absolutely not be the case. As both of you have already said tonight, there are things that happen outside of the family that lead to a sense of not belonging. And as I was describing earlier in an anecdote, there are within person or psychological forces that might also be driving someone to a lower sense of belonging. Now, all of that being said, I do want to answer the question. And I think just taking the time to connect and talk about vulnerabilities and internal states and emotions is always going to be important. So in as much as we can do that, I think that's very good. And at the same time, there can be broader forces and factors in society that can be working against that. So I think we need responses at multiple layers of society, at the community, like what we're doing today, within the family, within the school, within the neighborhood, and also individual supports, like mental health supports within the person.
As I thought about that question, I was almost in tears, and I hope I didn't cry. I just very so. I'm a younger mom. My first is only 16. So I'm not going to talk about my family. I'm going to talk about the family I came from. And I'm doing that intentionally because I had willingly shared how I did not feel like I belonged as a young person in school, as a youth. One space that kept me going and gave me sanity every day was my family. Because once I got through those doors into my house, where my dad and mom would join within half an hour to 1 hour, now I could talk. My voice mattered. I could share everything. What I had been through, who bullied me, and my mom would say, so tomorrow we're going, I would deal with them. The principal would say in their office, tomorrow morning, they did that, I'm going. And I'm feeling like, yes, my champion is going the next day. So that was the first thing. Every voice mattered. And I keep saying this everywhere I go. I'm the first of 5 kids. I have only one brother. He's right after me, and there are 3 sisters, 4 girls and a boy. Our girls never, ever felt like we were less than my brother. We were equal children. Every voice mattered. And you know, my dad proved it to me further when he passed. Because when we read the will, I was so proud of that man. He clearly stated point number 1. Everything I'm about to distribute belongs to my 5 children. And each child has 1/5 of everything. I'm like, yes, that's the father I knew. So I wasn't more important than my baby sister, who I'm almost 15 years older than. We were the same. Every voice matters is my first one. The second one was, in that family, there were routines and there were rituals. And we all looked forward to it. So whether that was a movie night in the days of VHS, and we knew that day. So when that day came, we were all looking forward to it. That in itself was something that made me feel like a part of a family that mattered. And then, whether I was wrong or I was right, I knew somebody would sit with me and walk through what that thing was. And it didn't matter. The days I was wrong, I was confident to go say, I messed up, and this is why. And I wasn't going to be killed. We're going to walk through it to see why it was wrong or why I should be celebrated. So there were the days of spanking, and there were the days of celebration. But I guess I could confidently go to get either, because I knew the person that was talking to me loved me. So when I was going through all those things in school, all that was going through my mind was, let the final bell go so I can run to my safe space and either cry or laugh. Because there were times that I had to be crying because my mom would say, why didn't you? And by the way, on a lighter note, this was my quote from my mom. So the Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I put a quote beside my bed, the fear of Mama G, my mom, is the second level of wisdom. And that kept me out of trouble a lot. So my point is, and that's why I was getting a bit emotional, as I reflected, I was like, no wonder I really miss my parents. My mom passed 2005, my dad decided to go this year. They were my safe space. experiences. Even when I got married, as I began to work, when I moved to the United Arab Emirates and to Canada, I knew when to pick my phone and say, Daddy, this is happening. And I knew I was going to be fine. If nobody outside cares for or believes in a youth, parents, we must. Sometimes they are all we have. And I've said to my siblings, now that they've gone, we are all we have. 5 of us together is our space for belonging. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oluseun, for sharing your personal experiences with belonging and how your family helped you feel like you belonged. Thank you also, Dillon, for talking about how it's not only your family who can help you feel like you belong, it is everyone around you. The way that I see it, we're all like a nucleus, with the people around us being like a concentric circle, with every single person playing a role in our upbringing and in our sense of belonging. So I think that's all we had for today's talk show, as I put it earlier. Thank you so much to Dillon and to Oluseun for coming out to share your experiences with belonging and all of your knowledge that you have on the subject. I would also like to thank everyone who made this event possible, the Belonging Expo possible. It was an absolutely amazing event, an amazing time to get to know all of the different organizations and groups of people that make the Waterloo region one of, in my opinion, one of the most belonging spaces in Ontario.
Yes.
Or Canada, or the world. Or the universe, we could say that too. Yeah. So thank you so much to everyone who came out today. Feel free to come have conversations with Dillon, Oluseun, or myself. And the booths will be upstairs until 8 p.m. tonight, so if you haven't taken a look at all of them, you guys can go see that now. Thank you.
Thank you.